I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. In animation. But it wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education, too. To the adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most of the kids at the time would shit themselves over it just to work, at Nickelodeon. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got a few new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it, alright? Without giving too many unnecessary details, they had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season, but the delay lasted longer for me, upsetting reasons. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and the sound editors for the final cut. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty. We all gathered around to the screen to watch it. Now, given that it isn't the final yet, animators would often put a mock title card, like some sort of inside joke for us, like with phony, oftentimes lewd titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny about work-related chuckles, So, when we saw the title card, Squidwards Suicide, we didn't think more of it than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as normal. Story began with Squidward practicing for his clarinet concert, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down. He has a concert tonight, and he needs to practice. So SpongeBob and Patrick say, okay, and SpongeBob and Patrick went off to go see Sandy. The bubble splash screen comes up, and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. And this is when things begin to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, the sound is synced up with the animation. So yes, that's not common, but when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There's a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not a normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could hear clearly. You could hear actual booing in it. Like someone's angry and yelling at you. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, and SpongeBob is in the center frame, and he too is booing. Very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is everyone has these hyper-realistic eyes, and they're very detailed, clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red, and some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal for children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn, and the view of his porthole window is of the night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is that at this point, there is no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there blinking in the silence for about 30 seconds. And then he started to sob softly. He put his hands, or as you would call tentacles, over his eyes, and he cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, a sound in the background, a very slowly growling from nothing. Barely audible, it sounded like a slight breeze through the forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at the shots 10 seconds apart, side by side. His sobbing gets louder and more full of heart and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if to twist in on itself. For a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sounds like it gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. And the eerie part is that the sound and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes and the sound was coming through the other side. As good as the sound studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of the quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and it never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if I make things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. And what we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face, I think, was bloodied, and one eye dangling over an upturned face popped. He was naked down to his underwear, and his stomach crudely cut open, and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road, and the most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer, but there was no crime tape and no evidence tags or markers, so the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be like an evidence photo. But it seemed that the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but we pressed onwards, hoping that it was just some kind of sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before. In half the body frame, there was now what appeared to be blood dripping down his face and eyes, and the blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style as well, so it looked as if you were to touch it, you would too get blood on your fingers, and the wind now sounded as if it was from a gale blowing through the forest, and there was even snapping sounds of branches and laughing, a deep tone lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back, and we all were, but he knew he had to. This time the photo appeared to be of a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach and her arteries in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was popped and naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her, above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in the size and the shape to the first. I choked back to vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. We resumed the show, and after about 10 seconds after this second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound. Like it was when the scene started, he put his tentacles down and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen as if he was watching the viewer. About 10 seconds, he started to sob, and this time not covering his eyes, and the sound was piercing and loud, and the most fear-inducing of all this sobbing was mixed in with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face and heavily rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. At this time, the still photo lasted for about good 5 frames, and the animator was able to stop on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy, the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out of him. They were being pulled out of his stomach wound, and by a large hand, the right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on the back. He went onto the next back. Well, the same thing. He wanted to go back and play the first played, and then quicker. I lost it, and I vomited on the floor, and the animation and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts, and we saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop, and he had to call the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within 15 minutes, and he was confused on why was he called down there. So the editor just continued to play the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming and sounds stopped again. Squidward was just staring at the viewer for a full frame of the face for about 3 seconds, and then the shot quickly panned out to a deep voice saying, "Do it." And then we see Squidward's hands. He pulled a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun to his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him and his bed. He flies back with the force, and the last 5 seconds of the episode shows his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it, and then the episode ends. Mr. Hallenberg was, of course, obviously angry at this, and he demanded to know what the hell was going on. And most of the people left the room, so at this point, it was just me and a handful of us watching it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint to the entirety of it, and my mind caused me horrible nightmares. And I'm sorry to state that the only theory we could think of was that the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to there. The CTO was called to analyze it and the analyze of the file did show that it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All the equipment involved was examined for in software, and the hardware was as well. As at the time, stamp may have glitched and show the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came out of it. No child scene was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues or the photos. To this day, I never believed in the unexplainable phenomenon before, but now that I have something that has happened to me, and I can't prove anything beyond accidental evidence, I now think twice about things.